Welcome to the FinOps video series. My name is Everett Berry. I'm the head of growth at Vantage, and I'm here with Mike Norton, VP of Cloud Services and Operations at PBS. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be able to do this with you guys.
So, Mike, tell us a little bit about your background. When did, if you remember, the term cloud even land on your radar, and then what impact did that have on your career?
Sure. So I started my career as an engineer, did a lot of Java type development, and then in 2009, I was a contractor at PBS before I started as a full-time employee. And they had just started to enter into the cloud. They needed some scalability for the first streaming service that we launched, and they just couldn't handle that in the data center. So we were in the cloud, but even then, there was no native auto scaling in AWS. The console was almost non-existent. But that was my first taste of it, and it kind of opened my eyes. Before that, I had always been in places where when you needed to launch something, first of all, you usually packaged it up and handed it off to an ops team or an infrastructure team, and they would deploy it. And if it needed new hardware, you were filling out 10-page Word documents to list what's your 3-year storage plan and needs, and then you wait for them to order it and rack it. And so to suddenly have programmatically just launching things and taking them down, it really opened my eyes to the ability to have just-in-time architecture, just-in-time infrastructure. That the decision to launch something became a two-way door decision instead of a one-way door. You could try it out, didn't work. Let's try it on a bigger box. Let's try it on a different type of box. So it really opened my eyes, and from there I started getting into architecture and operations, and it kind of changed my career in that path.
Yeah, and so from those beginnings to actually being featured by Werner Vogels, the CTO of AWS, in his reInvent keynote for PBS work on cost optimization. What was that experience like, and why do you think PBS is such a good example of success in the cloud?
Sure. No, it was surreal. I wish I couldn't be there. I had already booked my flight back the night before we knew we were going to do this, or he was going to do that. And it was surreal to see him showcasing our work. What was even more surreal was getting to spend an hour on a video call with him and his team, and getting a preview to his whole frugal architect mindset. And it really helped solidify that the work we're doing, we're not crazy, that that this is the way AWS thinks that you should be thinking about these things. And so it was, I think we were a good example, because as a nonprofit, we have to be good stewards of the money that we're spending. Right. And so we've been thinking about costs for a long, long time, probably longer than a lot of companies.
Right. I actually think that's something that people that are a bit newer to this space get confused on a little bit, is they start with the just saving money aspect. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that AWS and the other clouds are aligned with a lot of the work that you're doing, that Vantage is doing, in that they really want people to run efficiently in the cloud. And so in one sense, FinOps is about saving money, but in a maybe bigger sense, it's about actually having business success on the cloud, which leads directly into your role.
Yeah, it also is it's all about observability. I think one of the things that he said in one of his rules, it was basically you have to measure. You can't fix what you can't measure. So a lot of we're pivoting. We've done a lot of work on trying to find wide swaths of savings with things like RIs and savings plans, but now we're starting to pivot more into, let's really get a good sense of the actual workloads and what each workload is costing and doing, so we can then start to more efficiently go in and pick a workload and get that optimized.
Yeah, and actually I would love to get a sense of those workloads. Everybody knows PBS.
Yep.
What is PBS doing in the cloud that requires you to have a maybe more complex architecture and also just keep a close eye on costs?
Sure. So we are, there's a number of things we're doing in the cloud. I'd say that the two biggest that I deal with are, we are hosting our website and websites for our stations, websites for our producers. If you go to the Masterpiece Theater homepage, that is a server that we host for them, because we wanted to have it under our domain name and felt we should control it. And then there's a website, and then there's all the ecosystem around streaming videos. And so all of the backends for the apps, when you pull up our app on your Roku or your Apple TV, that's making calls back to our APIs. Those APIs are fed by content management systems that we've built for the producers to put their video in to indicate when it's available, when it's not. And then all that video has to be transcoded, stored, streamed out over CloudFront CDN. So it's CloudFront is our biggest expense because it's just we're streaming petabytes and petabytes of video every month.
And that's a fairly classic or standard setup for a lot of media companies,
Yep.
right? Behind the scenes, all the content that we're consuming on phones, it's in the cloud and it's being fed to us.
Yep.
So I actually just talked to your colleague Warwick about cloud architecture. I'd like to ask you about cloud operations.
Okay.
So you mentioned to me in a previous conversation there are kind of 3 legs of that stool.
Yeah.
What are those legs? How do they come together? And how do you and Warwick sort of work together in that cloud operations, cloud architecture world?
Yeah, so to me, anytime we're talking about cost, the conversations quickly turn to things like governance and security. And I think that to me, that's 3 possible legs. I sometimes think there's maybe a 4th, which is like performance. But to me, good operations is good security. You have to have governance in place to keep those things in check. So for example, one of the things we're doing to try to optimize our costs is to consolidate on sort of instance families. Let's stop everybody going and getting just whatever database type they want. Let's solidify on, we're going to use MySQL and Postgres, and we're going to pick M5s or R5s or whatever the case may be. We can say that, and then and we can fix that, and then it will drift. And same thing with security, right? You can say, don't open these ports to the world, make sure these things are patched. Then on the cost side, you might say, we need to have these tags in place for everything. So we're looking now at governance as sort of that 3rd leg to be able to actually enforce those things, or at least report the things as they drift.
And centralizing all of that, I've heard people talk about a function to do that called the Cloud Business Office. For the folks at home that maybe aren't as familiar with this space as you and I are, what is the Cloud Business Office or a Cloud Business Office, and kind of what role does it play for you in cloud operations and strategy, and also in sort of managing and controlling costs?
Sure. So, I mean, Cloud Business Office is what we're calling it. Some people call it their CCOE. In some places, that is the CCOE is a dedicated set of people who that's their whole job. We don't have that luxury. So, the way we've kind of worked it out is the operations team and the architecture team, which at this point the architecture team is Warwick, report to me. And the idea is that we are going to be there for all the cloud needs for a project or program from infancy to death. And so in a perfect world, we're going to be there to review their plans before they go to the cloud, help them choose the right cloud, make them aware of what our tagging strategy is, and help them think through, have you thought about the cost of this? Does it scale? How are you planning to monitor it, and who's going to support it? Does it have a shelf life? One of the things that, not a cost thing, but one of the things that I've spent a lot of time early at PBS doing was just going and finding all the old stuff that people still had running, that nobody had the wherewithal or the desire to kill. But once I pointed out, hey, this workload is costing $1,000 a month, all of a sudden their tune would change, and they say, oh, you can get rid of that.
How close are you to that perfect world you just described?
It's a journey. We're making progress every day, but we're still trying to get the whole organization working with us. We're still trying to perfect what that process of reviewing things before they go live. We're still working on the tagging. We're always working on the tagging. We're still working on a lot of things, but we're making good progress and good inroads.
Yeah. Process-wise, I wonder if you could just take folks behind a day in the life, week in the life of a director of cloud operations. I've heard it described that FinOps can happen on a monthly cadence where you have these monthly reviews. So I imagine there are some regular things that happen, and then there are surprises and new things that come up.
Yep.
So I would love to just take a peek into a week in your life, and then also if there's any recent sort of happenings that in as much detail as you feel comfortable with, you'd like to highlight. I think it'd be really interesting for folks to hear.
Sure. Yeah, week in the life. It is so varied. We're definitely trying to get better about being proactive about things like let's go to team A and review their costs. In a perfect world, we would get our tagging to a place where we would know this workload has had a 15% increase in cost this month, and then that would be that team's responsibility to go and maybe write up a paragraph. What happened? Was it you're running an extra set of the architecture for a migration? They didn't realize. We had a team that was running Athena queries and didn't realize how much that was costing, and because we're not all the way there yet with the observability, it got hidden in the bill for way too long. A few weeks, but it was one of those, oh boy, we need to go talk to somebody and track this down and fix this. It's partnering closely with our security team. I'm constantly talking with them just about cloud security and how we can make that better. It's talking with teams about finding old architecture and figuring out how we can migrate it into containers. It's trying to build reports for the finance team. It's very varied. Never a dull moment.
Yeah, I imagine that. One last question on kind of a long-standing FinOps topic, chargeback versus showback.
Mm-hmm.
What's your view of each model? And again, just kind of educating the FinOps community and folks maybe a bit newer to this space, when might one apply versus another?
Sure. So we follow the chargeback model, and it does make my life more complicated because at the end of the month, one of the things I have to do is split up the bill and take that and get that to somebody to. Then that person's job is made harder because they have to go through 30 plus lines and enter all of those as different things into our accounting system. Showback would be easier for me just because it would allow me to still show people what they're spending and try and hold them accountable, but I wouldn't be doing that sort of heavy duty divvying up. That being said, chargeback model does make them responsible for their own stuff. And so if they decide to make a box twice as big as it needs to be or a bad decision, ultimately it's their money, not mine. So, there's some benefit in that for my team's workload. But with showback, I feel like we're missing opportunities where my team might be able to be more focused on overall costs and trying to find, places where we can actually work together. And I'll give an example, RIs. When you buy an RI, you can't control if you can buy them at the organization level, and that gives you the ability to say it's going to apply to the first thing that spins up and takes it.
Yep.
And the benefit there is that if the team that was using that M5X large decides not to, they switch to a different architecture, the next M5X large in line will get it. And that could be in another account for another team. The way we're doing things, that would end up having somebody getting a free server because we paid for that RI. So it makes it more complicated. What we have to do some, we're now buying things, a lot of things are being bought at the account levels.
Right.
But that then means there could be waste when things change. So.
And in fact, AWS has actually been changing some of the considerations around buying RIs as of late. Has your thinking on discount strategy evolved at all because of that?
Yeah, after savings plans came out, we switched to those for doing it. We stopped buying EC2 RIs. It's just much easier to buy, and and we took the strategy to maximize savings. We said, let's just get no upfront, and we'll pick a very conservative watermark, and let's start with that. And we plan to start laddering that over time, but. That's worked really well to the point that I keep requesting from Amazon, please, can you add RDS and Elasticache and Elasticsearch and Redshift into this, because those I still have to go and buy, on a yearly basis.
Yeah, I think that's a feature request we hear often. So on that divvying up charges thing, you're actually legendary within Vantage for replacing a long Python script with the Vantage API.
Sure.
So maybe take us back to how that script got started and ultimately why you chose a tool to replace it.
Sure. So when I started full-time at PBS in 2014, we had 5 accounts in AWS, and we had to split the bill 2 ways. That was it. It was easy. And the 2 ways was this one service went to one cost center, and then everything else went to another one. And so end of the month, I would just pull up the console, look at the bill, and say, okay, here's how you do it.
Simple.
And then we started having more and more accounts being created. And then around 2017, we had other business units starting to move into AWS. And now it wasn't suddenly the 2 cost centers. It was a growing number of cost centers. And then even, as the financial team decided, we're going to add project codes to, it's not just business unit A, it's business unit A and project X, project Y. And so it got to the point where I am now, where I have 30 plus of these cost centers to divvy up. And the logic for it also got extremely complicated. There are resources like Amazon's Media Live, which is a live streaming channel you can build. You can tag that, but we have multiple business units using the same channel, and we wanted to split the cost 50-50.
Yeah.
And that you can't do in AWS. So my script started growing. The Cost Explorer that AWS has is, it works, but you can't do complex logic. And so but the Cost Explorer APIs allow you to chain that logic and say, I want this and this or this. And then I would get that cost of that channel, and then I would use Python to split it in 2 and round and get floating point. It was a mess. And so that was my world, and that script kept growing and kept growing and kept growing. And then I started, and the other downside to that was there was no way to view those costs mid-month or in dashboards or anything, right? If somebody came to me and said, why did you charge $4,282 to this cost center? I would have to say magic, because my script goes and pulls all these different things together and kind of glums them, and that's how I did it. Can I see that on a chart? No.
Yeah.
So when I started talking with Vantage and realized that I could build these reports using the kind of complex logic I was using in my script, have them as dashboards and reports that you can view on the website, but then also just programmatically call your API and pull the content of that report, that was just, it was a no-brainer. It took all of that complex logic. I don't even have to connect to AWS anymore.
Yeah.
I just connect to Vantage, pull those reports down, and go to town.
Go to town. Since that time, your cloud architecture has evolved a lot. Vantage has evolved a lot. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other problems that you've ended up solving over time with Vantage, and sort of how are you keeping pace with the evolving world of FinOps using the platform?
Sure. I think that the biggest thing we've solved is being able to put this data into the hands of the teams that are responsible for it. Yeah. An example would be we have a team that is responsible for everything in 4 different AWS accounts, but they've also got some VPCs and direct connects in a shared networking account that are tagged to them. That is not something that they can look at in Cost Explorer. It's not, they could go account by account and look at it, and then we'd have to give them permissions to that shared account and tell them how to look for the tag. Vantage just lets us create that report, give it to them, and they now have a good sense of what their costs are, and they can see those things. And then they can drill down even further into what S3 bucket is causing us to have X amount of dollars in S3 every month. Right. So that's probably the biggest thing we've done. We've definitely played a lot with all the tooling around in Vantage around exploring what we should be reserving and so on and so forth. But I'd say the biggest thing has just been the visibility.
Yeah, awesome. The other layer on top of all of this is that AWS isn't the only cloud that you use.
Yep.
So just in general in the FinOps world, before we get into Vantage, what is the added challenge when you add in a Datadog or a New Relic or an additional cloud provider that has a usage-based consumption model?
Yeah, it gets difficult to keep track of what are we spending, where are we spending it, how is it being spent. We don't have any workloads that span clouds, but it would be nice in certain cases to be able to say, this is the cost of the AWS footprint for this project, and also they are using up this much Datadog or New Relic. Yep. or whatever. We're mostly AWS. We have a small footprint in GCP and Azure, yep. And those are to a single cost center each, so we don't have the complexities yet. But as soon as we have that complexity, I know that I have a tool to do that, and it won't be that hard. So.
And Azure and GCP are really working hard for that, I imagine, as well.
Yep.
So getting all of that data in Vantage, getting the reporting set up, that actually enables you to share those reports with other folks on the team, and then they, in some ways, get visibility and also control over their own costs. So take us through actually kind of implementing that process change where for the first time an engineering leader or a manager says, this is how much my team is spending on AWS this month, and now I'm using this tool to divvy that up and possibly reduce it.
Sure. As an example, we had a team that had questions about their spend. They were seeing it going up every month, and they asked us, what is going on? And so we gave them access to Vantage, and they started digging into it, and very quickly they could see S3. Okay, what in S3? And so they were able to then drill down to the buckets, and within the buckets they could see, okay, it's by in this bucket. So already it's helping them to just hone in on the problem child, not on wasting time, in the weeds. And then once they went through and found that bucket, they were able to go down to what part of S3 is causing this fee. And in this case, they discovered there was a bunch of data transfer costs. And lo and behold, what it was that they were using that bucket to stage for an on-prem system to pull it down, and they didn't realize that was going to generate costs. They were only doing that because the team on-prem, a totally different team, wanted this done. So what we ended up deciding to do to re-architect to get around that was we created a bucket in another bucket that was assigned in the account for that other team, and they would just basically synchronize the files over to that bucket, which doesn't have a data transfer cost, and then that team, if they want to download a petabyte of content, that's on them, and they get to pay for it. So that right there helped us to go right down to what the problem was, re-architect a little bit, not even a big change, and eliminate those costs. Yes. Or at least reappropriate those costs to the team that should be responsible instead of the team that unwittingly was having to pay for it.
Yeah, so kind of that plus chargeback is like democratize FinOps across the org.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so since Werner featured PBS in reInvent, I have to ask you about the Frugal Architect. For folks that haven't seen, these are a set of principles. You can see them at thefrugalarchitect.com that Werner Vogels has laid out for building cost-efficient or at the very least cost-aware applications in the cloud. And so law number 1, make cost a non-functional requirement. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like performance. That's not a functional requirement. When the product manager is saying we need to implement this shiny new button or we need to add this feature, they're not necessarily saying and make it performant. But you do need to be thinking about that as a requirement, that this can't slow the system down. And the same thing with cost. You have to at least have awareness of that cost be a requirement so that you can know, yes, we can add your new feature, but just be aware this is going to impose all these costs, and then actual decisions can be made.
Yeah. And in a period of maybe a greater focus on cost optimization versus, let's say, growth from the zero interest rate days and years, that's more of a necessary requirement.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, understanding what this will cost. You don't want to be implementing a feature that raises your cost so high that now your margin has gone down and you're not making as much per customer.
Right. Law number 2, systems that last align cost to business.
Yep. I mean, again, if you are being frugal and understanding what it costs and honing those costs down, it's going to last longer and be better.
Awesome. And then last law to ask you about, unobserved systems lead to unknown costs. This one, if you've been watching the full interview, is probably pretty self-explanatory, but the unobserved systems aspect. What does it mean to have something unobserved if you have Vantage set up and you have cost monitoring set up? Is there anything that's still unobserved?
In our environment, absolutely, because we're not there yet on the tagging journey. But yeah, if it's not observed, it means if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, is basically part of what that means. Things can get lost in a bill. Especially in our case, our bill does fluctuate a decent amount because we're running our CDN through Amazon, and our CDN costs are a direct relation to how many people we're watching. And so in a month where we have a big premiere, our bill will be a lot higher. And if that same month somebody goes and runs a bunch of Athena queries that are costing a bunch of money, it's easy to miss a $10,000 increase in costs because you're like, well, I didn't really have time to go look at the bill. I know it's higher because of this other reason. and you miss those things. Where if we can get down to the case where we're understanding the cost per workload and now starting to look at it at a more granular level, we can then start to understand, okay, yes, the streaming video platform went up in cost, but oh, this other workload over here also went up 20%. Why was that?
Yeah, got it. All right, to close things out, I'd like to peek into the future.
Okay.
What are you looking forward to in the world of FinOps? What use cases that you aren't doing today are you looking forward to working on? And if there's any role that Vantage plays in that, I would love to hear about it.
Sure. I mean, absolutely, getting more integrations into Vantage would be, we were just the other day exploring the costs of another cloud provider and our SaaS platform. And the first thing that Warwick said was, we should ask Vantage if they can get this into here because it would be really nice to have this all in one place. I think getting that all in one place will help us to get our financial team more engaged with that and seeing and understanding what's costing us money and why. And then related to that, just getting the teams more aware. We've had some success, for example, with one of our teams. They're now building a cost audit into a sprint once a quarter. And it's just once a quarter, they added that as a big part of that sprint is let's go through, look at the costs, see how they measure up to last quarter. I'd like that to get down to a better, a more often cadence, but it's a start. It's a start. So I think Vantage has been a huge help in that. So I think getting to a place where everyone is just aware and everyone is responsible and is able to, own those costs. And then I guess that's where it comes back to. That's the benefit of the chargeback model.
Yep.
In a showback model, they may not have as much skin in the game.
Skin in the game. Well, I think we can end it there. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sharing your insights on FinOps. My name is Everett, and if you'd like to learn more about FinOps, you can go to our website at vantage.sh.